Tēnā koutou e te iwi, nau mai hoki mai ki Nui Te Korero. Ko pola kā tōku ingoa, huria hau no ngā iwi o Taranaki. Welcome back everybody to Nui Te Korero. My name is Paula Carr and I hail from the tribes of Taranaki ki te Tonga. I am the Senior Manager for Māori Strategy and Partnerships at Creative New Zealand, Toi Aotearoa. My gender pronouns are she, her, and today I'm wearing black top, an olive robe, and I have shoulder length black hair. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jamie Tuta, to deliver his keynote address entitled Ko taku raukura he manawa nui ko te ao. My raukura is a symbol of determination and resilience to the world. I've known Jamie for a long time, and both of us growing up on our ancestral whenua at Taranaki, at different ends of Taranaki. As tamariki, we would attend hui and we would watch and listen and learn from our kuia and karaua about our stories, whakapapa tikanga, and always encouraged to do our bit to help advance our people. For Jamie, his education and his experience has led him to work extensively at executive levels for our people across a wide range of sectors, including iwi and Māori development, investments, agribusiness, health, education, and of course, historical treaty settlement negotiations. Jamie holds governance roles across tourism, broadcasting, iwi development, investments, and conservation. Jamie has been sought after for his advice from decision makers right across the motu, from community leaders through to prime ministers past and present. I'm very proud to introduce Jamie. He's an inspiration to me and to Aotearoa. E te rangatira tōku koe naunga e Jamie, tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe te tuahine, tēnā koutou e te motu e te ao, nau mai kia piri, nau mai kia tata. Ki tēnei wānanga mō tātou. Ko te uri au o Taranaki maunga, me te kōrero nei, ko Taranaki tōku okiokitanga, ko au tōna okiokitanga. So kia ora everybody, it's a pleasure and an honour to be here to join our wānanga. Unfortunately not having the ability to be able to see one another face to face, but it's truly a pleasure and an honour, and I want to acknowledge my tuahine Paula, my whanaunga, for the introductions. I thought what I'd start with is a video. So my discussion today is based around a concept called He pua waiau no runga I te tikanga he rau ringa ringa noroto I te raukura, ko taku raukura he manawa nui ki te ao. And this speaks to this really important symbol for us in Taranaki, the raukura. And I then want to talk about a poi, and which speaks to some of our ways of being and knowing of Taranaki. But before I get into my presentation, I want to start with a particular poi that was sung at the signing of the Taranaki Iwi Treaty Settlement. And I want to start with this poi because, one, it demonstrates that our poi is a living, breathing art form. And it is not something that has been assigned to the history books, but it is living and breathing, and I want to start with this poi now.
E nai hine mai, kore koutou e riro I he tai atu. Ko te uri nō rā koutou, o rua Taranaki, o tēnei kuia o tātou arahutu te pau. Ko reira tuku nā koutou reo, kia ronga mai rā rātou I te pō. E hine mai, wākina, wākina, wākina mai rā. manu nei kara ko ama tapu tapu a te mahara tuntarangi marere. Tau kurai te hara te tūmai ai te kahura koro mohe. Te rangi hari ki runga te nā te kawaka e ke ka e ke ki te uarai. I runga e te kawa e rangi nui, rangi roa, rangi tau ai. Tiki nui, tiki roa, tiki poia, tiki wairohea, tiki tau peha, ki te rea para tutu, pūwai ronga, pūwai tāna, pūwai tū, pūwai takaroa, pūwai nui, pūwai nua, pūwai ngari, pūwai tau, pūwai motu hari.
I wanted to start with that poi, which is a poi that speaks of some pretty vile acts and an experience that my kuia, our kuia of Taranaki, wanted to shelter my generation and future generations from. That particular poi speaks to the interruption of whakapapa as a consequence of the sacking of Parihaka and the military occupation of Parihaka for 5 years, from 1881 to 1886. And the poi itself uses very graphic imagery and symbolism about how the whakapapa of many of our kuia was interrupted as a consequence of that particular period. And I think it's important because our kuia, when they spoke of that particular poi, reflected on the fact that we do not want history to repeat itself. And so that poi serves as an example to us that we should not let ourselves fall back into that particular period. And so my kōrero today speaks of the raukura. And this particular kōrero from Te Iti o Rongomai, he pua wai au no runga I te tikanga, he rau renga renga no roto I te raukura, ko taku raukura, he manawa nui ki te ao. Which simply put states that we of Taranaki are the result and the fruition of a collective lived experience, and that we have sought strength and inspiration from our raukura, the white feather. And my raukura is a symbol of determination and resilience to the world. And I think this statement is really important because it speaks to the importance of symbols of this place, Aotearoa, of this land, and is an example of the way in which we draw upon symbols and expressions to provide inspiration and strength. Reflecting on that poi, the emotion that it invokes, we look to these symbols, we look to this philosophy of the raukura to carry us forward. But also what it reminds us is that our ways of being have guided our people for generations, and that we need to have faith and belief in our wisdom, ngā kura tuku iho, literally those gifts handed down to us. Because our culture is a living culture, not one assigned to the history books or only on display in museums, but one that can thrive, that is dynamic, and that can meet the needs of the present and future generations of iwi and Māori. And so Māori have a lived experience, a wisdom and understanding that can inspire, guide, and inform how we navigate uncertainty and challenge now and into the future. And I want to draw upon elements of the Taranaki experience because it is the experience of my own tupuna by reflecting on the leadership and approach and the tools that both Tohu and Te Whiti used to inspire their community, that we can draw some inspiration and lessons. So I'll do this by examining a poi and providing the context of the role of the poi and also the power of the raukura and the philosophy that guided our tupuna. So the poi is here. He hara te manu. What is the message? Ko taku poi te manu. My poi holds the messages of liberation. He hara te manu. What is the message? Ko taku ringa te manu. My hands demonstrate action and resistance. I hold the message. I am the messenger. I wano ki reira titi ai. We will proceed and be steadfast. I wano ki reira ki te ai, with resounding messages. Te manu wati pura tangata matua i a tāne tahu no mai kia piri, no mai kia tata, which speaks about the blind, that it will be these messages, this approach, this conviction that we have that will shed light and clarity to the blind, so the Crown, the government of that time, or those that don't see the opportunity before us. And the poi instructs us to draw these elements close and together. Now this poi was composed during the late 1800s, during what could be characterised as the golden years of Parihaka. Just look at the architecture of this particular house. The experience of Taranaki was one of responding to the pressures of the time. The ultimate objective was to seek the return of our land and for us to prosper as Taranaki, as Māori. Tohu Kākahi and Te Piti o Rongomai adopted the poi as a vehicle of inspiration for our community and iwi. The poi is both sacred and special, a tool to capture, retain and transmit knowledge, history and experience. Our poi inspired our tupuna in times of prosperity and also in times of adversity. It instructed our tupuna to be resolute, kia manawa nui, to be united, kia kotahi te whakaaro, to have courage, kia manawa roa, and determination. The poi was a key tool used to build community resilience, to build confidence and understanding. It supported the community response to the atrocities in Taranaki, large-scale land confiscation, loss of autonomy, loss of resource, the unlawful incarceration of our paake, and decades of violation at gunpoint and by the pen. The poi demonstrate and are an example of our collective lived experience and recount the models and frameworks derived from our place, this whenua, that guide and inform how we might navigate uncertainty and overcome challenge. The poi draw on foundational narratives and cultural references, key metaphors, and speak to the power of symbolism, the power of Māori wisdom. The poi references manu, birds. Manu engaged the imagination of our tupuna with their songs, their colours and their power of flight. They symbolise leadership and the messages they carry. Throughout time, influential and significant leaders have been described metaphorically as particular birds. For example, references to te pi tongatonga, mumuhau, takareto. Ngā kura, feathers, particularly rare feathers such as that of the huia, also signify leadership. So our people of Taranaki have strong narratives associated with manu as not only key symbols, but also their importance in terms of informing our tikanga, our ways of being. For example, the use of birds in our language, in our reo, kai kawe korero, manu te oriori, manu takiata. Their characteristics also reflect the characteristics and personality of humanity. Messengers, providing guidance, advice and instruction, warning against danger. They call the new day, new opportunity, and act as a sentinel and much more. And of course, Tohu Kākahi and Te Piti o Rongomai have long been seen as the reincarnation of leadership, mumuhau and takareto. It's really interesting because when they were ordained as the leaders to carry the movement, they flatly declined, saying that the mantle should be offered to the chiefs of the land. The response to Tohu and Te Piti was, "Kua noa tu kōrua te wakawai I tō kōrua orokohanga o te ao. Ki au taina tēnei taonga nui ki runga I a kōrua, ko kōrua hei kaiwaha I tēnei taonga nui." And I find this response from Tohu and Te Piti fascinating, as it speaks about the leadership role as a taonga nui. And it notes, ko kōrua hei kaiwaha I tēnei taonga nui, that they will carry this gift of leadership. Viewing leadership as a taonga reminds us that we must treasure any leadership role and look after it, because with it comes great responsibility and obligation. Manu also symbolise liberation movements, as they're able to take flight to transcend the complexities of human behaviour and see the broader view. It is true that today Māori communities, their knowledge, skills, resources, people and assets represent a net national opportunity. However, the challenge is how this opportunity might become a reality, as there are a range of challenges that remain for Māori. Poor health, imprisonment rates, educational underachievement, unemployment and more. These matters all have an impact on whether Māori as a whole are able to achieve potential. And many of you listening, watching today are aware of these challenges and the implications if we do not find solutions to such challenges, given the demographic profile of Māori and the need to lift the overall performance of Māori for the benefit of our country and our nation as a whole. So there is also the challenge of a system of a dominant culture and institutional arrangements that limit and prevent the level of transformational change required, that prevent the level of liberation required, a culture that fears Māori-led solutions, that struggles with the by Māori for Māori approach, as it is seen as some way separatist, threatening or destroying non-Māori privilege, a system that by and large supports the status quo, a reluctance to change, to evolve, for example, appointing people in one's image under the guise of merit, people who look and feel like you, people that you feel comfortable with, self-perpetuating elitism, and Māori who are so-called lucky to be in the field, that field are the good Māoris, or alternatively being pigeonholed as only knowing the Māori stuff, not capable of working beyond the Māori lane, or even worse, being called upon to know and do all things Māori. We don't ask the same of non-Māori to do and know all things non-Māori. And interestingly, the issue during the time of Tohu and Te Whiti with the settler government of their time was one where the settler government was afraid of the influence of ngā manu erua, the fact that they sought rangatiratanga, mana motuhaketanga, put simply, the desire to have their lands and resources returned that had been unjustly stolen to enable their community, our community, to prosper. Now the ability to make decisions, they wanted the ability to make decisions that would enable their success and in doing so enable the community to identify and be Māori. A community at Parihaka that had street lights before New Plymouth. A community that for some reason posed a risk to the stability of the nation. Now I'm a strong believer in renewing lessons of our past and believe that all Māori communities retain creative potential, the ability to address their issues and to seize upon their opportunities. A key is of course the ability to imagine possibilities, to shift to a place to imagine the possibilities, new possibilities that are meaningful and relevant. And I ask, how might this occur when we have had generations of violation and trauma? The poi I played earlier demonstrates and is an example of that violation and that trauma. A colonial history that has resulted in an imbalance for Māori. So I want you to imagine that all of your whānau, friends and community members regularly experienced traumatic events, upheaval, violence, criminalisation. Imagine the trauma of this experience reinforced by government policies, economic systems and social norms that have systematically denied your people, your whānau, access to safety, mobility, resources, education, dignity, identity, and positive reflections of themselves. Many of you involved in the arts sector can play a role in contributing to the transformational change that is required. So just think about this. If we really want to make a transformational difference to the situation Māori find themselves in, we can't ignore the impact of colonisation and the desire of Māori for self-determination. If colonisation is the cause of the problem, then it's quite simple, right? Then self-determination is the solution. This, of course, has implications for you and all of us. Fundamentally, it requires a willingness to decolonise our own minds, our own mindset, systems and behaviours. It requires an understanding and awareness that Māori self-determination isn't something to be feared, but something to be celebrated and embraced. The poi I recounted reminds us that we, you, me, all of us, ultimately have the means to make the change, to be the change. He hara te manu, who is the liberator. Ko taku ringa te manu, my hand, me. I am the vehicle of change. I have the ability to take action. So the question is therefore one of what is required to restore balance. If we consider that colonisation has caused harm to Māori, then it naturally follows that a key way of restoring such balance would be to enter into a process of decolonisation. Quite simple, right? So decolonisation is the process of undoing colonisation. Taken literally, decolonisation means that the land that was stolen is returned, and sovereignty over not only the land and its resources, but also social structures and traditions are granted back to those from whom it was stolen. Of course, in a modern context, this is not pragmatically possible. However, it does beg the question as to what is possible. What actions, what steps might we take as a nation to contribute to undoing the impact of colonisation, or put another way, to recognise the place and value of Māori. Māori knowledge, Māori language, Māori systems, Māori approaches, Māori creativity and art forms. Māori ways of being and knowing. How might we take responsibility for our part in creating and maintaining a system that continues to oppress, suppress, fail and marginalise Māori? So therein lies the question. How might we decolonise our minds and dream about our future? Dream without fear, dream without limitation to consider what is not only possible, but what can be achieved. How might we consider how we can make mokopuna decisions and be remembered as good tupuna? And of course, much of this starts with the individual. The poi reminds us, ko taku ringa te manu. Each of us individually have a role to play. We can all take action, demonstrate leadership and courage personally and professionally, seek understanding, call out bad behaviour, reflect on our own bias, consider our own prejudice, recognise our own privilege, how we might have an open mind and open heart to think about fairness and how we might give something up to accommodate opportunities for others. And you know, today there is much talk about regenerative practices, regenerative agriculture, regenerative minds and all of this sort of stuff. But for me, it starts with regenerating our own minds, our own consciousness, and it starts with us understanding our own flaws. And so returning back to where we come from and who we are, our connection and relationship to our places, all will assist in regenerating our own mindsets. Understanding what it means to emerge from the belly of the mountain. So that's the kōrero from Taranaki for Paula and I. Te Miringa Hohaia would often say, you know bro, what we've got is something unique. We've emerged from the belly of our tupuna maunga. And sharing that with our children. But also reconciling our relationship to our place and to each other, which from time to time may require us to reset and rebalance our relationships to our place and to one another. Perhaps considering pursuing te reo Māori, the language of this whenua. And here I don't mean our country, the language of our country and our nation, but the actual language of this landscape that will provide an insight to not only the Māori world and all of its beauty, but the beauty of this whenua, this land, the waters and the oceans. Beyond us as individuals, there is the question of the role of the arts sector in supporting the transformation of the present Māori reality. How the arts sector might introduce new ideas, support the shift in mindset, how it might break down the barrier and privilege that exists, how it might inspire thought leadership and action, how it might think about power sharing, trusting Māori, having an open heart and an open mind to new ways, taking risks, allowing Māori to define success, not being afraid to be bold in order to reinvigorate Aotearoa. Me personally, I have optimism for our future, and I often think about how we as Māori might shed the grief of our past and turn our minds to the hope of the future. A future where restoring balance to Aotearoa is not an aspiration or something academics opine about, but rather a reality. We can return balance to Aotearoa by moving money and resource to where the hurt is worst. After all, to use another metaphor from the manu, mā te huruhuru te manu karere. A bird cannot fly without feathers and wings. So a vibrant, dynamic Māori society or a Māori arts sector cannot thrive and prosper without resources. So enabling and supporting Māori or a Māori arts sector to thrive should not be seen as a threat or an objective and goal that undermines Pākehā. How is it that the notion of supremacy causes people of privilege to be afraid and disconnected from their own humanity? Relinquishing dominance or sharing power with Māori should not be seen as a destruction of privilege, but rather the manifestation of the prescription of the nation-state envisaged under Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Māori developing solutions to achieve well-being and prosperity. And I think we need to be reminded from time to time that listening is not the same as being silenced. Empowering Māori to succeed should also not be seen as separatist or a threat to democracy. From an iwi standpoint, quite simply, when we reclaim our share of resources, when we recover our places at various decision-making tables and have the ability to design our future, we will see the necessary intergenerational change to achieve the realisation of our iwi aspirations. Our ability to shape and design our destiny, our future, which speaks to those things that we see as important and vital to our own identity and our prosperity. And from my perspective, defining the aspirations to be achieved for Māori or iwi is a task that is primarily for iwi and Māori to lead. It is fair to say that much of these aspirations were not Māori-led in the past. In a post-settlement environment, Māori are now well positioned to articulate this aspiration. The aspiration can be characterised by a desire to preserve and sustain, and in some cases adapt and change, uniquely Māori concepts, values and priorities, while at the same time developing a basis for Māori to successfully engage in the complex and interdependent global society in which we live. So how do we build a new cornerstone? Social change. How do we do things differently? Are we willing to do this? And what is the role of the arts to advance this particular kaupapa? So in returning to the poi, it instructs us, I wano ai ki reira titi ai, I wano ai ki reira kete ai. Act with conviction and courage. Each of you hold positions of influence and touch various parts of your own social circles and society more broadly. If you believe the arts have a role to play, then you are the manu, you are the bird, you are the liberator, you have the ability to provide leadership and positively affect change. I wano ai ki reira tutu mai ai kia wati te pura tangata matua. You also have the ability to provide leadership that will enlighten the blind, whati te pura tangata matua, and those that don't see the value of the required change. Here is potentially the greatest opportunity. As this poi provided inspiration and conviction for my people, the arts too might do the same to challenge ideas, stimulate new thinking, support the relationships necessary for nation building. And the poi reminds us that progress and unity can be found by trusting in deep wisdom of Māori knowledge, the knowledge of local communities, rather than potentially chasing expertise from outside. We often seek exemplars and models that are not of this place. We look to other shores. And I pose the question, why do we look outside of New Zealand for our answers, for our solutions? No mai kia piri, no mai kia tata. The poi concludes by stating, embrace this approach and thinking. It demonstrates that true healing and lasting justice won't be discovered in the technological advancements of the future, but recovered in time-tested wisdom found close to the ground. So how might we embrace a new paradigm based on connection, relationship and belonging, rather than one based on divide, control and exploit? Ko te pupuke, ko te maara, ko te manatū, ko te iringa. Iringa nuku, iringa rangi. Our consciousness, our understanding, our awareness provides the potential to shift to a dynamic new way. I understand that research regarding the arts has clearly demonstrated the value that the arts and culture play in terms of broader community and societal well-being. He mana nui tō te ao toi. Therefore, it has the potential to facilitate relationships to help us thrive rather than to hurt and divide us. So the arts play an important role. You play an important role in our country's understanding of who we are as a Pacific Island nation and not a subset of Britain. We know that the divergence from the Indigenous worldview, a view that seeks not to own or control, but to coexist with and steward the land and non-human life forms. A philosophy of wakapapa, relationship with place, which underpins the relationship and responsibility that one has to ensure appropriate balance. So whānau, I ask, what is your vision for Aotearoa? What role does the arts play to assist to shape who we are as a modern nation state? What is your vision that people can coalesce around? What are those values and principles that speak to our place, our people, Aotearoa? As a nation, and certainly as Māori, we have a never-ending need for leadership. And those that are privileged to be in positions of influence and leadership should use such privilege wisely and responsibly. And I want to underscore that we should use privilege wisely. So, my question to all of us, will you be the manu? Will you be the vehicle to make change and to drive this vision? Will you be the voice of change, encouraged to look beyond your blind spots, your prejudice, your privilege? What are your opportunities to drive change, to transform the current reality on a scale not seen before? What high-quality strategy, policy and investment will be required to deliver the magnitude of intergenerational change required for Aotearoa? Our small size is an advantage. You can do this if you so choose. The future of restoring balance for Aotearoa must be one that can coalesce around a vision that will balance multiple capitals, and not just the four that the government are currently advancing. Experiential capital, cultural capital, natural capital, spiritual capital, human capital, and others. How we might create a virtuous cycle and not a vicious one. So our thinking needs to continue to change and evolve as a nation, and we need to tell stories of success, stories of this place, this whenua, that reflect who we are, what we are, stories that draw on the deep wisdom, models and frameworks of this whenua, this land, Aotearoa. It is a fact that Aotearoa and Māoridom has been transformed in the last 25 years. Economic and social well-being, culture, the tai ao, and we need to now consider what the next 25 years will look like, and how we might have some measure of control over what this future might be, recognising that there is one constant in this world, and that is change. So many of the solutions lie with Māori. Just look at the wonderful wisdom and instruction in this poi. We need to build a culture of trust and innovation, and then collaborate on a scale not seen before in this country. Māori well-being and prosperity will not occur if we do not demonstrate courage. Kia manawa nui tātou, kia manawa roa tātou. Courage. So we need to inspire our people with vision and have the courage to lead. Kia manawa nui, kia manawa nui, kia manawa nui. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou.
Mihi atu ki a koe, Jamie, that was an amazing kōrero, and thank you so much for that inspiration. We're going to be closing our social media now, and in a short while we will start questions, which we will take from our app. So we will be with you shortly. Kia ora, Jamie. So as we transition into more of a closed session with attendees who have joined us online for the question and answer session, we've got quite a few questions rolling in, and people